I'm going to go ahead and kick off and get started. My name is Aaron Chadbourne. I'm broker at Demetria Real Estate. I'm also president-elect of the Greater Portland Board of Realtors. And I'm so excited and appreciative to our panel today. When the decision came down from NAR, one of the things our leadership team did at the Greater Portland Board of Realtors was we said, what's our role in all of this? What can we do? And we really realized that our role is to support our local community in helping navigate what this decision means for us and how it affects our businesses. Now, I think, and this is my own editorialization, that a lot of the impact is really just on how the media has covered it. And we've all seen the headlines and the stories, and they don't necessarily reflect what was in the settlement agreement. And there's still some unanswered questions about the settlement agreement. So we're not going to spend a lot of time going into what's in the agreement, what's not. There'll be plenty of time for that later. And we're going to do more education as more details are finalized, as the settlement gets approved, as NAR and main listings and others change their rules about it. We'll dive into that. But today is really about what do you need to do today, and how do you think about the conversations that you're having with your clients to make sure that you feel comfortable and ready? Because some of these conversations can be uncomfortable. And so huge thanks to Glenna Irving, our president of the Greater Portland Board of Realtors. Glenna reached out and assembled this really all-star team of local colleagues who are willing to kind of share their time and give examples in their business. They are Derrick Buckspan, who is the broker at Remax Shoreline, Ed Gardner from the Gardner Real Estate Group, Heather Shields from Legacy Properties, Sotheby's International Realty, Jen Tabb from Portside, Scott Townsend from the Scott and Sonny Townsend team at Keller Williams. So a huge thank you to our panelists. I ran some numbers just to see kind of how you all represent. And on a lifetime basis from MLS statistics, our panel together collectively has sold $1.45 billion of Maine real estate over the course of our careers. So when we're talking about people who know real estate and know this business, there's a lot of experience here. The biggest question I think we're all getting right now is this question about buyer agency and whether buyer agents get paid. Let me start with you, Scott. Pretend I'm a seller client and I say to you, I've heard the NAR settlement means I don't have to pay buyer agent commission anymore. Headlines say the commissions are getting slashed. So I don't want to pay a buyer agent. What's your response?
Yeah, I think first off, and then I'll role play that through with you. I think sometimes less is more, because we can get a lot of us, we're good at talking the gift of gab, and we can end up going down that road. And this, I didn't make this up, but this is the best one that I've heard so far, whether it's responding to a question or just having a conversation with somebody on the street that may not be a direct buyer or not, is what you pay is most likely not going to change. How you pay it is what's changing. It simplifies it. So to go to your question, Aaron, first off, I always answer a question sort of with a question. Thank you for asking me that question. Why is that important to you, Aaron?
Well, I want to pay as little as possible. I want to put as much money in my pocket.
Yeah. So what you're saying is what you pay in professional fees isn't as important as to what you net, correct?
Yeah, no, I care about what I take home.
Okay. Well, certainly you do have the option, and you always have had the option, because commissions have always been negotiable. But you have a choice as to what you offer a buyer agent out there right now in the market or in the future. And if you choose to offer zero, that's entirely up to you. But may I share with you why it's beneficial to offer buyer agent commission?
Sure, I'd like to hear that.
Okay, great. So first off, it has been customary for the past several decades for buyer agents to be compensated in the MLS. So that's what the market is used to. Second is, when you hire me to sell your home, you're not only hiring me, but when we put it into the MLS and we offer compensation to a buyer agent, we're opening it up to over 7,000 licensed Maine real estates to help sell your home. So why that's important to you is twofold. One, you get more exposure to your home. And two, you have somebody that's working with a buyer, because buyers do want representation. So when someone's working with a buyer, that person is someone that they know most likely and that they trust. And what do you think is going to give you the best chance of getting your deal to the closing table? That buyer working with somebody that they know and trust, that's a professional that can help get them to the closing, or going unrepresented?
Great, thank you. And that gives me an opportunity to also talk about antitrust discussions generally. Some people get nervous with conversations like that talk about commission. Let's talk about what's inbounds and out of bounds for the rest of this conversation. What Scott just did is inbounds. He's talking about examples of how you talk with clients. We're going to steer clear of any discussions of specific compensation policies, anyone's company policy, or anything as an industry that deals with it, but not with the facts and with how you talk about it with clients. So as you're making answers, if you could steer clear of specific numbers or specific policies, that's helpful. And if that would be the same case for the questions. As you have your own question of what you'd like to hear the panelists respond to, please throw it in the chat and we'll try to take from those questions. Heather, let me ask you the same question. I've heard in the news that I don't have to pay commission anymore, so I don't want to. What's your response?
So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you're absolutely correct. But let me tell you the reason why you should. If you cut off some of your audience, you might be eliminating someone who could and would give your best offer. You get one shot at this, and you may be reducing your audience by not offering that. And then sort of following up with what Scott just had to say, which I think was totally on par, but also asking the questions, just sort of saying to them, like, what are you hearing about this? What questions do you have for me? Letting them sort of express to them exactly what their concerns are, but then sort of answering it with, yes, you're absolutely correct, validating them, and then going into why it's a good idea and why they would be eliminating some of their audience if they didn't.
So, Jen, let me give you this version of the question. If we don't offer buyer compensation, won't it be likely that you, Jen, are going to bring me the buyer? I'd rather have you do it. I don't need all these other agents involved.
So that's an interesting question. And so I'll speak to what I would typically say to someone if they did ask me that. The reality is that probably 10% of the time or less, I actually have a buyer who is interested in the particular property that I'm listing with you. And the reality is kind of like what Heather said, that you really want to open yourself up to the broadest range of potential buyers. And without having the entire population of buyer agents that are out there getting access to your property, you wouldn't know that my particular buyer was actually the one that was going to give you the best terms and price for your property.
Ed, what do you think?
I agree with her. I always sit down with buyers before we go out on the trail looking for homes. Of course, you're going over the main relationships form, but also the buyer agreement, which in there says cause to be paid or paid. And that starts a whole conversation, whether you're going to work with a for sale by owner or work with a property that's going to give you compensation. But I think we have to, put the buyer first, put our clients first before any offer of compensation. Whether we're making a large commission or a small commission, that buyer is ours for life. And if we do a good job with them, they're going to do a good job for us and hold our industry true.
I love that. So there are two major changes in the NAR settlement. One is that compensation is no longer going to be listed in MLS. The other is that MLS participants are going to be required to have a written agreement with a buyer before a showing. So Ed, speaking of those buyers, let's pretend I'm a buyer. I want you to show me a house, but I don't want to sign an agreement with you.
You can. Let's, I don't know you and you don't know me. So let's go, we'll look at a house, we'll look at one house and we'll learn about each other and see how that works. However, if you're going to be serious about buying a house, then you have to sign a buyer's agreement, whether it's going to be cause to be paid or I'm a transaction broker for you, that agreement has to be in writing. And it's to your benefit, because otherwise I can't represent you. I can't tell you about the value of other homes in the area, what this house should sell for. Is it underpriced or overpriced? When we're on an inspection, of course, I can't tell you if it's going to fall in or if it's a great value and so on. So you really have to drill down the value of buyer's agent to your people.
Derrick, same question to you. I want you to show me a house, but I don't want to sign a buyer agreement. I don't really want to do that.
That's a great question, Aaron. And I do think there is a little bit of this that I think is evolving a little bit. I think we're going to see an MLS rule that says, hey, you have to have that buyer agency agreement signed before you show the house. So whereas today, legally, we have to have it to represent, but much like Ed, hey, let's go look at a house, but I can't step into that representation until we have the agreement signed. So I think we may have a little bit of a tweak, particularly where this comes up for me. It's a past client that I've already done business with multiple times, and I might be guilty of jumping in the car and showing the house, moving in the direction of, hey, we're going to get this signed, but hey, this is the first one they've re-entered after being in the house. We've got a lot of pieces to have happen. But I think there's going to be more education conversation needing to be had about, Aaron, let me jump into role. Let's talk a little bit more about that. I understand your goal is to see the house, but you have to understand I'm operating in a context where I have laws, ethics, and rules that I have to comply with in order to show you that house. So I can't just show you the house without us having some more of that conversation. So I tell you what, could we meet for coffee? There's a great spot just down the street from the house. Could we meet there prior? Could I come with some of this information? Could we talk through some of that before we go look at the house? I'll go ahead and schedule the appointment, but it's really important for you to understand once I step into that house with you, what my role is and what I'm legally bound to and what you're getting for that representation.
No, it's a great point. I think pointing out that people have gotten the habit of the first time you meet a buyer, if it's an online buyer, you get the lead. Some people just meet them for the first time at a house. There are safety concerns with that, but there are also some missed opportunities for that buyer presentation. So getting in good hygiene of early buyer consultation before you start showings, or having that consultation at the first showing. I'll tell you something else that I've done, Derrick, is I've sometimes written into the buyer agent agreement, this agreement pertains to this one property only. So you get the buyer agent agreement or transaction agent agreement. There's also a transaction agent agreement in zip forms that you're welcome to use if you're not ready to be a buyer agent, provide the representation. But now you have a written agreement, you make it specific to one property, and then you revisit it after. If they end up liking you, I like saying, look, I like to date before I get married too. So let's see if we like each other. And if we decide that we want to get married and be in that relationship together with a contract, then we can do a full buyer agency contract.
And I think just as a follow-up to that, looking at this crew, Scott, it would be correct in assuming that maybe there are times that you train a little bit differently than you operate 100% of the time in the field.
Oh yeah, I think that's the case for all of us. And I think sometimes the longer we're in the business, we end up creating some habits that aren't necessarily best practice.
I was just thinking through that in that scenario. It's like, okay, I need to do a better job of carving out the space to have that. And a lot of this happens because we're busy and we're trying to multitask and what's the most efficient way to do all of it. But we just need to we need to be more rigid about carving out the time for those conversations.
If there's time, I always reflect, if there's a situation where I don't win business, I look back and most likely I've got DNA in it where I missed a step in my process. So, that's always a learning opportunity, and we are going to have to get better and really, really have these conversations. And that's the positive thing about everything, with change comes opportunity. And if you think about this, and we were talking about it before the Zoom started, is really what it's going to be doing either before or after the settlement. It's forcing us to have more conversations with our co-brokes, with our community, with our clients, with customers, and overall, that's going to elevate the business. So at the end of the day, this is going to be a good thing. But I just want to add, Aaron, I totally agree with you in the way around that is just signing an agreement for that specific property. And we even have forms. I got to be honest with you, in 23 years of real estate, I've never used a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement, but that may be something that we have to get familiar with. But I always go back to starting it with a question. If Aaron came to me and said, do you want to see a property, but you don't want to sign a buyer agreement? I'm going to start it off with, I assume you're asking because of the latest announcements in the media. What's important to you about that, or why do you not want to sign one? Because oftentimes as real estate agents, we're trying to solve problems or answer questions that we really don't know the true meaning of. So for me to ask Aaron why that's important to him is going to help me answer that question and tailor that answer to satisfy his needs, which will ultimately get him to agree to sign a buyer agreement and see a property with me. But until we start asking those deeper questions and understanding why it's important, we're going to keep coming up against roadblocks with that question.
I think go ahead, Jennifer.
I was just going to add one more thing just about the showing property when you haven't met a person before. And I always feel like regardless of where someone is, whether they're out of state, it's easy to set up a Zoom call. It's easy to make that time, even if it's just a 10 or a 15-minute conversation. And by doing that, you're already showing to that potential client your value as a broker, that you're not just a person with a code to get into a property, and that there's a value that you bring to the table for them.
And I would, sorry, Aaron.
Go ahead.
I just add too, the best defense is offense, right? So if we're going into something with processes in place, like Scott just said, a buyer is calling us, we always have a few days before we're actually meeting that buyer. Typically, you know, what are our processes? What's in place? We're actually, as Jen just said, making an introduction to them up front, sending them information up front. We're creating a relationship with them before we even meet them. So that's helping to sort of, you know, help with the dating process. I mean, obviously we're not asking them to marry us right up front, but that 2 days of dating is super beneficial. So just my 2 cents.
Too. I think there are a lot of times that each of us as individuals in our business, we have this voice in our head. So, well, that won't work for me. I can't do Zoom meetups, or I'm not comfortable. A mentor of mine, Howard Brinton, who started Star Power, he used to say, get out of judgment and get into curiosity. So rather than take what Jen says about setting up a Zoom 10-minute consult, well, don't say I can't do that. Say, what would it look like if I did something like that? Or how could I adopt something like that? Because I think these are the conversations that haven't been had in many cases throughout the market, throughout the industry, that have led to some of the misunderstanding and distrust. And it's reasonable that with home prices being so high, everyone's looking for a scapegoat, so they're going to come to us. But we know what value we bring, and so we have to talk about that value. Ed, let me ask you that question. Why do I need a buyer's agent? What do they do for me as a buyer?
Well, good question, because I think in this busy market, and as some of us like Scott and others that have been in the business for 20 something years, we get a little lax on educating our buyers. We might meet them at the property. We might give them a Form 3 the third time we meet them, or I'll say agency relationships form. They really don't know what they do for it. You know, we show them a house, we drive a nice car, we wear nice clothes, we get big commission checks. That's what they see a buyer agent doing for them. You know, and I get complacent on that too. But recently, you know, with all of this and comments going around our realtor family about what we really do for buyers agents, I was in Anaheim, California, and met Michael Lee, who is wrote a book on justifying your commission. And I encourage everybody to go to store.realtor and be able to pick up this book. It's $100, but it's pages full of nuggets to be able to share with your buyer clients to justify your commission, why you're there for them. Because I don't think really a lot of them know that.
And if you go to facts.realtor or commission.realtor, there are also a couple documents that have, I think it's like 179 things and then 150 more that agents do that add value. Those are things to familiarize yourself with. And the thing about scripts, and I like to talk about scripts and dialogues, it doesn't mean you have to memorize and read something that a book says, but it's what are the things that you're saying over and over and over to the similar questions you get, right? When someone asks you, why do I need a building inspection? You know how you explain that. Or can I waive a building inspection? You know how you answer that question. How are you going to start to get comfortable answering some of these questions, which I just want to invite one more time, anyone that's a participant in this, if you go to the chat, if there's a question you're getting or one that you're worried about answering, that you'd love to hear answers from our panelists, go ahead and put it in the meeting group chat and I'll try to grab them from there and pose them. Scott, one question that I get a lot from members of the public, they may not be clients now, but they say, hey, I've heard all this stuff in the news about the NAR settlement and realtor commissions. Like, what do I need to know? As a consumer, what do I need to know?
Yeah, and again, so how I handle that is I'm loving this short soundbite. Well, that's a great question, Aaron. You know, the reality is what you pay is most likely not going to change. How you pay it is what's changing. And I'm just curious, as it relates to you, why do you ask?
Well, I mean, I just know I'm going to be selling or buying a house in the future, and I know it's changing, so I just want to make sure I'm up on it.
Great, great. So you're thinking about selling your home. Where are you thinking about going when you sell your home?
I'm probably going to stay local, might move, closer to the ocean.
Okay, all right. That sounds great. And sort of I know you can't really time these things perfectly, but obviously you're thinking about it. We're having this conversation today. What do you think your time frame might be for doing that?
Probably like 2 or 3 years.
Okay, so you're a little ways out. So Aaron, we'll talk a little bit about it, and I'll answer any questions you have. The reality is the lawsuit hasn't yet been settled. So by the time that you go to sell your home and go to purchase your home, it may be very different from what it is today because this is still evolving. What we're going to see in this industry as the lawsuit gets settled and as things move on is the best practices will play out over time. And then the reality is nothing's really going to change in terms of what buyers need, what sellers need, and the value that I'm going to be able to provide to you.
Derrick, let me ask you the same question. When a member of the public, one of your clients says to you, explain to me in a nutshell, what was this lawsuit and what's the settlement about?
That's a great question, Aaron. So I think one of the things that's been a frustration to me is, no surprise, the national media has really sensationalized this settlement that's come through. That's really frustrating for me. And it's frankly been very confusing for those of us who practice in Maine. Maine is one of 19 states across the US that's had buyer agency. I believe it was 2007. I actually wanted to verify that with somebody who remembers I was practicing then, but my memory is not as good. So from a consumer standpoint in Maine, our buyer clients, we've had written agreements. We were practicing that even before it became statute in 2007. And there's a lot of clarity with buyers in Maine as to how their agent gets paid and how that works. It's right at the top of page 2. And you'll probably remember when you bought your current house, Aaron, we went right over that. And you'll probably also remember that it was that was paid out of the seller's commission at closing as a co-broke for the services. So the agreement says that you will pay or cause me to be paid. You also may remember, you may not, the next paragraph down from that section deals with unlisted property in Maine for sale by owner properties. And you'll also see that I had a compensation range in that section as well. And we talked about, hey, you can, any property we find that's viable for you, we're going to go look at, whether it's on the open market or it's for sale by owner. The reality is consumers have always had choice in how they sell properties. Any owner can just put up a sign or, post a property and sell it. What's changing with the antitrust piece, and I can kind of understand from a national perspective in a market where they're really not operating buyer agency, our industry had a little bit of a bad rap in how consumers understand how buyer brokers got paid. And there was, poor practice and, at times where people said, hey, our fees we're free, it's no cost, it's free to have a buyer agent. Well, that wasn't the full story. It wasn't accurate. The reality is in our case, it was co-broke from the listing agency. So that's been a frustration. And frankly, it's been confusing in Maine. The other aspect that's changing mechanically in Maine is that we can no longer offer that co-broke in the multiple listing service. That is frustrating because the multiple listing service has been the most efficient way for us to operate and communicate information about the properties. We've got this great shared calendar system that kind of handles the logistics for scheduling showings. So that is a frustration. Mechanically, we'll have some changes in it. But here's the most important piece to it. As you're thinking about selling your house, we want the most competition as possible for your property. We would love to be reviewing offers and have a stack of offers. Just like the things we're doing to prep the house, to make showings easy for the marketplace, to have accurate disclosure. We don't want to limit anyone in the marketplace because isn't your bottom line best served when we have competition for your house? So in that regard, there's no change in how we're operating, but the mechanics of how some of that's going to be offered will likely evolve and change.
Great. Awesome. I want to look at a few things that are in the chat. The questions that are in the chat that are about the lawsuit or about how things are going to change. The answer is some of these things we won't know until July. So between now and July, nothing's changing. You can still continue to put your co-broke percentages or fees or whatever the arrangement is in the MLS. Once it's no longer in the MLS, there's this question of how will you communicate what you may or may not be offering. Right now, there's no guidance about that because the only thing the settlement says is it can't go in MLS. It doesn't prohibit any other way of sharing that information, whether on an agent's individual website, whether through a phone conversation or certain other way, or on your sign at the property, right? There are lots of different options. That's going to evolve, and I expect we're going to get more guidance. One of the panelists brought up this issue about right now MLS rules prohibit you from doing X, Y, and Z. Main listings and other MLSs and NAR are going to be revisiting a bunch of these rules. So we're going to stay away from commenting on any specific solutions until we know what they are. In the meantime, the goal of this panel is really to think about what things can we answer and can you do now? I did want to respond to the one other question about open houses. Do you have to get a contract for everyone that comes to an open house? The answer I've been told is no. When you're at an open house, you're representing the seller. If you were to represent that buyer, or you'd have a conversation with that buyer about the property, that's when you would need to enter into a written agreement if you were going to be showing them the house as a buyer representative, when there are expectations about who gets compensated and how that works. Because the goal really is to make sure that people are informed about how you're getting paid, how much you're getting paid, who it's being paid by. And I say all the time when people say to me, oh, the seller pays the commission. Well, if the buyer didn't bring money to the table, the seller wouldn't have any, right? The buyer's paying the whole thing, and then the seller is sharing the commission. So it's all about the logistics of how the cash flows work. And that brings us finally to the question about the VA. There are, everyone knows this, there are certain limits and restrictions on what closing costs loans like VA loans will allow. NAR has said they're engaged in conversations about that. So I expect by the time the settlement gets finalized, there will be new guidance about it. But let me pose a version of that question to our panelists. Maybe Jen, we'll start with you. I'm a buyer and I barely have enough money to pay my down payment. I don't have enough money to reach into my pocket and also pay you. So I don't think I can have a buyer agent.
Well, I think that what we should consider is that the reality is that many of these sellers are still going to be compensating you, compensating for that portion of the commission that typically has been paid throughout the time that I've been selling real estate. And what I will do is have communications with individual agents to find out ahead of time what the compensation will be. We can also look at some other options. You might be able to ask for a contribution towards your closing costs to help assist you with that cost. We can find creative ways for you to be represented by me and make sure that your fiduciary needs are taken care of while still making it a viable option for you to be able to purchase a home that works for you.
Heather, same question to you. I don't want to sign a buyer agent agreement because I don't have any money to pay your fee. So I'm just going to call listing agents directly and handle it that way.
Yeah. And I hear you. I hear what you're saying. That's certainly something that we can talk about. There are, and again, we're all going to be working through this once July and once we understand all the ramifications around this. However, I think at the moment, I think that lenders are probably going to come forward and there's going to be some sort of way to do this. But again, we don't know yet. So the highest offer isn't always the best offer, right? Let's be creative here. Sometimes there are, things that we can work with on the seller, whether it's concessions, as Jen just said, maybe we come in at a lesser price, ask them for, compensation for my commission. Maybe we, offer them sort of creative move out dates or whatever. I mean, again, like we will get creative. We will find a way to make it happen. But I think, not hiring a buyer's agent, you have two giant risks here. One is not getting a home, and one is getting into a home that it has tremendous issues that you had no idea, to even anticipate, because the fiduciary duty was, by the seller's agent was owed to the seller, not necessarily the buyer. So I think explaining fiduciary duty as well is super important. Understanding, explaining to them exactly how we work, what our value is, using specific examples. They obviously, given that they may not have the financial ability to pay us, that could, that still could be a big concern. But again, there are ways around it. We will find ways around it. I think we all need to go in and realize, like, we are still learning this, understanding how this is going to all fall out. But there will be ways to do this. I firmly believe that.
Okay, but Heather, as a buyer agent, all you do is you unlock the door and you turn on the lights and you just let me in the house. Like, I could do that myself. Like, why do I need a buyer agent? Like, why does that matter?
So I think for me, one of the things, and I'm not going to role play here. So let me just sort of like step back here and sort of say, if we, all of us as agents, go through the last 2 years of transactions and we pick out exactly which ones would or would not have closed without us. It's going to be shocking and staggering. We are going to all have specific stories from those transactions that we can translate to all of our buyers. So first of all, that's an exercise for us as agents to understand that's going to help us. I mean, we are like our human race has evolved through storytelling. Like it really, you know, storytelling is where it's at. Pick out specific stories, look at your facts and figures. I mean, I think for me, it was like 20%, you know, it's a low number that wouldn't have closed had we not been there to shepherd them through this transaction. So I think for us, being able to sort of, again, express our abilities, express exactly like, hey, you know, I had a buyer say to me last week, you know, we went to an open house, we wanted to make an offer and you said no. And we're so glad now because look what happened. You know, like specific storytelling is where it's at, I think, to express our value to people. So that's not role playing, but
That's okay. Jen, you were going to say
That-
something and then we'll go to Derrick.
Yeah, I was just going to say one other quick thing. I know we're talking a lot about having conversations with buyers about their fear that they're not going to be able to afford to pay the fee to be represented. I think a bigger conversation is talking with our sellers about that when they're giving pushback about paying any longer and explaining to them that, you know, buyers are the people in the transaction who are having to come with a large down payment. They're additionally, most of them are still financing. It's not, you know, everybody's not cash. They're having another $8,000 to $10,000 in closing costs. And most of them are simply not going to be in a position to pay for representation. And if they're not able to be represented, there's going to be a lot of difficulty in getting those transactions to close because they're not going to understand how the process works. When they're working with a listing broker, you potentially are opening yourself up. I've read a statistic recently that for sale by owners have the highest litigation rate of all transactions in the industry. And so I think of it of talking to them about the fact that if they don't have the money to pay for that representation, but they want it, they're going to have to do things like reduce the price that they offer for your house. And so really the most important thing is what is the net that's important to you as a seller to have in your pocket at the end that's going to allow you to do the next thing that you want to do in your life. And we should be less focused on paying that commission and more focused on achieving your goals.
Absolutely, 100%. I want to add on to that too, that I think that when there's not buyer agency, when there's not a buyer agent on the other side that's representing the buyer and looking out for the buyer's own interest, you're absolutely right that it opens the seller up to more liability. And that's how juries are going to look at it. That's how the courts are going to look at it, is there's going to be much more scrutiny of the seller. But when there's a buyer agent involved, that buyer agent is also a liability shield for the seller, because they have someone independent that's advising them. And if there are things that they miss, that's on them. They were encouraged to get representation. They had competent representation. It's on them, buyer beware. But when they don't, there's a lot more scrutiny on the seller and the seller's agent. So it's really, I mean, it's a liability shield for the seller as well, which I know we all shy away from talking about. But I like to tell my clients, look, when we finish a transaction, we want to be finished with it. We don't want to hear from that buyer ever again, unless it's to thank you for letting us move into this great property. We don't want to get sued. We don't want to hear about the water in the basement or the mold in the attic. We want to make sure we've taken care of all of it up front. The same reason that I like to have building inspections before it gets sold is the same reason I like to make sure there's a buyer agent involved, so that there's someone else independently verifying information, giving advice to the buyer, so that, you know, everyone has full information to make the best possible decision. Derrick, I think you had something you wanted to add.
I agree with everything you said, Jen, as well. Heather, I really like the concept of thinking of those examples that you can tell a story about what your value was, because I think that is such a great way to connect with people. I've moved towards my initial meeting with a buyer is trying to move away from the value proposition of finding the house and saying, hey, the value that I bring to you as a buyer representative is likely not finding the house in today's age. Occasionally it might be, I might find something off market or coming to market, that might be, but that's really not the core value proposition. Or the narrative that the world has is that, oh, we find the house, when reality is the hard work is not finding the house. What I tell them is, hey, after this meeting, I'm going to set you up for a search. So you're likely going to get alerted of the new listings, and you're probably going to see it faster than I do, frankly, because I've got more of those for more clients. I review them on a daily basis. And I typically have a text from my client about, hey, can we see this one? What's the deal, before I actually see it. So really just moving towards that, and then trying to have narrative to talk about for what the value proposition is. My next piece, and this is tough, meeting that I'll never forget I had last year from the son of a past client who wanted to buy a house, and hey, they're ready, they can buy a house. And of course, they came out with some houses they wanted to look at. And I said, hey, we really need to meet in the office to have a conversation about this beforehand. And it was an FHA buyer, 3.5% down, and the expectation for what they could do in the marketplace. I lost sleep the night before the meeting because the nature of the conversation was, hey, I want to educate you about how our industry works. Here's a lot of forms and materials and other things to do. I can't achieve success for you in today's market. The best thing for you to do is to continue to save and try to get to the 5% down so that you can be a conventional buyer, go into some open houses, get educated. Let's talk about the process. But I'm not even asking for buyer agency agreement because I'm not the right person to help you do this, because I don't think what we can do is realistic in today's market. Super tough conversation, but the mother was, really appreciative afterwards. I think that will come back in spades. I think that was the best thing for that person, and some education. And that's not to say that I don't want VA and FHA to figure this out in other ways. And I agree with it. Hey, lots of creative ways to do this, but sometimes that's the tougher conversation to be had, and the reality of the market environment that we're in.
Great point. I want to go back to Jennifer's point about educating the seller. So Ed, you're sitting there during a listing presentation, you're going through commission, and you get to that section that says, this is what you're authorizing me to offer out to a co-broker fee. Seller says, I think we should offer out 0. What's your response?
Well, you're probably going to limit the amount of people that are going to come through your house, because buyer agents are not going to work for free. It's just not going to happen. So instead of having maybe, 4 or 5 offers that are going to get you maybe 150,000 over your asking price, you might get 5 offers or less that might be at or below. So I think it's excellent to talk about the current culture of where we are, where we've been for a long time. And why not? Because you might make it up in spades anyway, to be able to, to your point, Aaron, you're representing the buyer. Somebody else is representing the seller, but all bases are covered here with 2 professionals at the table. The deal's going to go a lot better.
Scott, when I bought this house, I paid my own closing costs. And now you're telling me that the buyer agent commission is a buyer closing cost. Why should I be paying the buyer's closing costs?
Yeah, well, that's great, Aaron. So the market is always changing, and we have to be aware of that. But the purpose of paying the buyer agent is a couple-fold. One is we want to get your property exposed to the most agents possible so that they can bring as many buyers as possible, because we know that the more buyers we get seeing your property, the more offers we're likely to get. And the more offers we're likely to get, the better price and the better terms you're likely to get. And that is what you want, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So what we're going to find is that by offering a buyer agent commission, we're going to bring higher quality buyers to your property. And most likely you're going to be getting more for the sale of your property than if you don't offer it. The other reason, Aaron, is if you choose to go out and offer 0, in this market right now, even though it's changing, buyers are going to be asking for a seller concession for you to pay that buyer agent for them. That's customary, and that's what's happening right now. And my concern for you is, even though that's most likely going to happen down the road, we're going to miss that crucial marketing opportunity for your property when we hit the market. If we're not offering that, we're going to lose out on all those buyer brokers. Does that make sense?
Sure. Heather, same question to you. I don't think I should have to pay the buyer's closing costs, the buyer's compensation. Let them worry about that.
Okay, so I'm going to step away from role playing again. Clearly, I'm not a good role player, but I'm going to go back to what Jen said. People don't care how much we make. They care how much they net. So our shared goal, Mr. Seller, is to net you the most money. The way to do that is not to limit your audience. This is an investment in your own outcome, Mr. Seller.
I also think that one thing to say about closing costs too, and one way that I talk about it now when it has, sometimes people need to finance in their closing costs, is I like to say the buyer's not actually asking you to pay anything. What they're asking is if they can finance those costs and roll it into their loan. That's what they're asking to do. They don't want you to pay it. They want to pay it, but they just want to pay it as part of their monthly payment, as part of their loan. So the number that you're getting is X, but the number we're going to see on the contract is Y, because that's the only way they're able to roll it into their loan, because the bank's willing to loan against the property, not against their promise to pay someone professional fees. So, I mean, there's a question in the chat from Grace about appraisal. I don't think we know yet how appraisals will sort out. I mean, I'm the type of agent who always likes to make sure that the number on the front page matches the number that the appraiser is trying to meet. So I think there's going to be, we'll see. We're going to have to see how our industry partners in lending and appraisals adapt to this. But at the end of the day, I think it's really important to keep the seller focused on, you're not necessarily paying anything. We're staying focused on, like Scott said earlier, that number that you're putting in your pocket. So let's talk about that number and those naturally. Go ahead, Scott.
And then just to touch on that, Aaron, I mean, you brought it up before. I think the thing that we need to do is obviously educate our sellers and our buyers, but it stems from the sellers and the benefit of offering either concessions or commission. And the reality is, everyone's touched upon it, is that buyers have indirectly been paying buyer agents commissions the entire time. It's just built into the cost. The other thing, when you have a seller that doesn't want to pay a commission, you basically have a conversation with them, or concessions after this lawsuit is done. You have a conversation with them and you show them the competition. When we're going through a CMA, we're looking at number of bedrooms, number of baths, and we're making adjustments for those. And I think really what we need to be doing is also showing them what is being offered. So if I go on a listing appointment tomorrow and I have a seller that is really adamant about paying zero, and the conversations that I'm having with them aren't getting anywhere, it's going to go to, well, you do want to be competitive in this market, right? And most likely they're going to say yes. Well, let's look at the 3 properties that are going to be the closest competition for you and see what they're offering for compensation, because you're going to want to be close to that to be competitive. And then you show them 3 properties, what they're offering for co-brokes, and then make a recommendation based on that.
And one of the sample questions I had sent you before is this one that we get, my neighbor's house sold last fall for 500,000. I'm going to sell mine for 525 and not pay buyer agent commission. I think the script you just gave, Scott, too, of, well, let's look at what they offered the buyer agent in that situation and see what the buyer agent was paid, because it helps people think through actual numbers and how it goes.
And I think with that question, Aaron, that's actually 2 different conversations. There's the conversation of pricing the home, which is the one that hasn't come up, and that the news sensationalized it, but home values are going to come down. Well, I find that funny, because home values are always driven by supply and demand. It's basic economics is what drives home values. If you're the only home for sale and you have 5 people that want to buy it, what do you think is going to happen to that price? It's going to go up. So I think, when that question comes up about the neighbor's house selling for 500 and a seller wanting more, I mean, we're dealing with that now, regardless of what's going on. So that's a price and value conversation to strategically price a property in the market to outperform. And then you're having the commission conversation, which you're going to hear a lot of common themes going back to, the 7,000 licensed agents working for you in Maine, and why it's beneficial to have a buyer agent and compensate a buyer agent. And that's what a lot of these conversations are going to come back to, is very similar answers as to the benefits.
Right. There's one question that Melissa put in the chat, says, what do we say to sellers asking if they'll get money back from the lawsuit? The answer I'll give you, Melissa, and I see Paul McKee, you're on here, so if I go astray of what the right answer is, let me know. But generally, that's one of the benefits of Realtor membership, is that the settlement covers everyone. So one of the reasons NAR agreed to it is because it really prevents follow-on lawsuits, so that we're all not individually getting sued in our individual brokerages, and that it was a class action lawsuit meant to settle this issue. And so just advise them to check with a lawyer, or to go look for details of that class action and see whether they're a member of the class. But that I'd also talk about, here in Maine, we've handled ourselves differently than they did, for many of the reasons that, Heather, I don't know if you said it in this conversation or before, but Maine has been ahead of the curve of some other states in having written brokerage agreements. Like Derrick was saying, when we adopted buyer agency, we've been ahead. So a lot of the practices, even educating sellers in the listing agreement about the percentage that's shared as a co-broke fee, like that is all stuff that hasn't been happening everywhere. That hasn't stopped DOJ and others from investigating the real estate industry, but it's really set Maine apart in many positive ways, and it's important to know. And then I'll just comment on, Rick, your question about after July, how will we know what the other competitive listings are offering? We don't know yet. We'll find out. Like there's gonna be innovation in how we do this and how we communicate. I'd say the same thing about the commercial market right now. And a lot of our colleagues who sell commercial real estate say, hey, that's not always offered up front. Sometimes you have to pick up the phone and ask, or there are other ways that it's communicated. And I think there will be innovation there. It's just not going to be in the MLS. And so we're going to have to adapt. We have about 10 minutes left. So I wanted to give each of you the opportunity to kind of offer any kind of closing thoughts that you have. And then I'll ask Glenna to come on, Glenna Irvine, to make any other closing remarks that she wants. But Scott, why don't I start with you? Like in thinking about kind of this new world and these conversations, what are some of your parting thoughts?
Yeah, so I've got a couple. First off, we'll kind of gonna go with a broad base because I've seen a lot of stuff out there, and keep in mind that this is still an active lawsuit. So the conversations that you want to be having should be conversations. I wouldn't go on a whole social media rant or put stuff in writing because you could be part of that lawsuit. You could open yourself up to severe liability. What I can say is that this is a great opportunity. Maine is ahead of the curve on this. With change brings opportunity. So those of you that are concerned or a little worried about how this may work, if you're solely focused on buyers and you're scared about what may come, there's going to be opportunity, and those that can navigate this the best will do the best for their client. And it's really about showing what your value is. And moreover, it's an opportunity for us to connect with our clients and our database. If you look across our industry, we don't follow up as well as we should. And the reason we don't follow up is because we're either call reluctant, we're afraid to pick up that phone and call somebody, or we're value deficient, meaning when we call them, we don't have value to add. This is a great opportunity for all of us to reach out to our past clients, current clients, people that we know in the community, and go on the offensive, like Heather said, is really, talk about it, see what questions they have, be the local expert. We can also have some fun with it when we get asked questions. I had a client asking me about this, and he stopped me and he said, what's interesting is in other countries, they refer to the news as propaganda. But here in the United States, we call it the news. And the reality is, whether it's real estate or something else in the news, it's very often it's often incorrect because they sensationalize what they want to look at. So that's my general thoughts. Is we're in a great spot. There's opportunities. The fact that the Greater Portland Board is bringing this to its members right now shows that we're on the forefront of what's going on. There's going to be more conversations. There's going to be developments, but there's also great opportunity here for us to take advantage of.
Great. And speaking of that, this session is recorded. I guess there was some sort of glitch where we were capped at 100 people for this. And so some people that registered might not have been able to, but please feel free to share this recording with people at your companies or your colleagues. Ed, why don't you offer your thoughts next?
Yeah, I think Scott hit it right on the head. This is the time, this market has been pretty crappy for a lot of buyers agents right now. And we have a lot of buyers just waiting in the wings that we're not reaching out to. We're not having conversations with. And now's the time to do it. Pull out that list of buyers and chat with them. And also, chat with the sellers about disclosed dual agency. That's something that wasn't brought up here today that you may want to think about as well. If a seller is saying, well, why do I have to pay a fee to a buyer's agent? Well, disclosed dual agency might come in, and that might not be something that your buyer wants to deal with, or your seller. But I think right now we're so lucky in Greater Portland, I'll say, being in leadership and see how other states and communities work in real estate. We have a wonderful realtor family in Greater Portland that's working together. This culture in Greater Portland has worked really, really well. And I think if we stay positive with the glass half full, we'll be able to navigate the storm fine. It'll be a little tumultuous, I think, as we get through some new ways of doing things, but I think this is going to settle out, and I think this will be a history point. I think hopefully we overcome and we're back to business again in several months after July.
Heather?
So I just want to say I am a lot about mindset, and I try as hard as I can, as Scott said, to avoid, I love that, the propaganda. And I think it's so easy for us because we pick up anything. I mean, the New York Times this morning, anything about, they're coming at us really, really hard. So it's so important right now to keep our mind right, and to just, whether it's meditation or reading or whatever it is, just to sort of, stay calm. We have to stay calm, and we have to realize, again, just like you said, Aaron, we are so far ahead of other states. I have a lot of friends in Florida, a lot of friends in Massachusetts. I actually went to Massachusetts last month and spoke to a lot of people about how to even use a buyer agency agreement because they had no clue. So we are so far ahead of most. So let's look at the glass half full picture and realize that in uncertain times like this, there's a flight to quality. The higher the quality service that we deliver, the better and easier it's going to be. So take Ninja. I can't stress that enough. Take Ninja if you haven't taken it. Read Unreasonable Hospitality. That book is so good, and so, I mean, it's it'll change the way you look at everything, I think. And again, the best defense is offense. We are going to get through this. It's just a lot of uncertainty. And for those of us who remember 2007, I'd been in the business for 2 years then. And I remember everybody panicking, all the brokers who'd been in for longer. And I was like, I didn't understand what the big deal was then. And now I'm like, oh, well, we made it through that. We made it through 2008. We made it through a financial crisis. We always have ups and downs. It's all going to be good.
Jen?
I think I'm probably going to be reiterating a lot of what other people have said a couple of different times. I think something that Scott mentioned that's really important is to ask questions instead of, when somebody makes a comment or might say something that sounds a little inflammatory or flippant, don't get on the defensive about it. Just ask questions so that you can understand what their thoughts and concerns are, because it makes it much easier to have a really good dialogue with someone. Again, really pointing out Maine's approach to already having been very open about compensation, the way that our contracts have been written for years now, where it's fill in the blank for commission, and where if we're doing, and I know that sometimes people don't have the same habits, but getting in that habit of the fact that you are talking about what is the commission, you're filling it in and having a conversation with that client, and you're being very open about how people are being compensated. And then looking at this is an opportunity for professionals to really shine at this moment. And I'm like Heather, I am someone who really has a big focus on mindset, about how you approach things, and looking for the silver lining in things that might initially seem dire. And I really do think in a year from now, I think people are going to really be feeling good about what's happening in our market. And this is not a doomsday situation.
And Derrick?
Great points, everyone. I think it's really important to think about the headlines and think about all of this coming our way from the antitrust perspective, and just understanding this is political at the DOJ level, at the federal level. This is political, and that's where all of this is sourced from. And I'm happy to have coffee with anyone to talk more about that. Won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but it's come our way, and it's confusing from the standpoint of how we operate under buyer agency agreements. Some of this is just kind of confusing. It's confusing from knowing that our clients are best served when they have buyer representation, when they have seller representation. We have this cooperative environment. So I would encourage folks to think about this from the standpoint of, hey, what's your vision for the marketplace that we operate in? How do we move forward in doing that? I think it's also important to think about our local, state, and national associations in conjunction with this. There's been so much backlash over the associations in this, and to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, to think about, hey, what type of business environment do we have the Greater Portland Board celebrated 100 years as a realtor board in 2021. So we're over 100 years as an association. Look at that on the national level and look at the advocacy that's done, the business environment that we have in this country because of NAR, and not lose sight of that. That's the highest, in my opinion, role of our realtor associations. And we want that moving forward. We're having to make some adaptations that are hard due to this, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, and let's focus on what type of a business environment do we want to operate in.
Great points. I think those are all great. And I think, so again, today, no one's telling you what you have to say to clients, what you have to charge for commission, what you like might or might not agree to. There's going to be innovation and there's going to be change, and we're going to adapt as some of these logistics and mechanisms get worked out. And a lot more of that will become clear as this plays out. But at the end of the day, like brushing up on the basics and figuring out how you talk about what we do, the value we bring, how we get paid, and why we're worth it, that's going to be the stuff that matters. I say this a lot. Many of you know, I chair our legislative and political advocacy committee for the Greater Portland Board. And the big thing there is, public leaders, officials, people who serve on town councils or city councils or planning boards or school boards, they all use a realtor to sell their house, or they know us in their communities. And so we need to do a good job putting ourselves in front of them to talk to them about the changes they're making. Same thing here. We can't wait for the media and mass media to tell our story for us. We need to have those conversations and tell those stories on a one-on-one basis. And this is really our invitation and our opportunity to do that. And Heather emphasized storytelling earlier. Storytelling is going to be one component of the event that we're doing as a board on April 11th with Matthew Ferrara, who's a great instructor, national speaker. It's going to be an incredible event. We have him all day in South Portland. I think the afternoon session will be on leadership and storytelling. It's only $30 for members of the Greater Portland Board. There should be marketing materials going out about it from GPBR in your email. So I'd encourage people to do that. And we're going to keep coming up with new and kind of responsive programming as a board to make sure that we're helping you adapt to any of the changes and keeping you informed as MAR and NAR stay on top of this. But if you have ideas of ways that we could help or things that we can be doing in as association, please let me know. Glenna, I think that concludes our program. I did want to give Glenna Irvine, who is the president of the Greater Portland Board, a chance to just close us out.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. So I just wanted to thank everybody for attending. I'm sure you've seen the multiple communications coming out from Greater Portland Board. And I wanted to let everyone know that we are very, 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 very committed to providing you with the most up-to-date information we have. We work directly with Paul McKee from MAR and NAR directly to get the latest information available, and we will send that out to you as soon as we have it. We're also committed to coming up with events like this, and the Matt Ferrara event, which is huge for us. So I encourage you all to stay tuned and sign up for these events. I also want to thank our panelists. This is not easy to put yourself out there and answer these questions, spot on. And so, we have a lot of experts in our field, and we will be tapping not just these folks, but many other folks in the future as we come up with new ideas of how to get the information to you and come up with scenarios of ways to get that information to you. So thank you all so much for coming. We hope you found it valuable and look forward to doing some more of this in the future.
I just want to echo Glenna's thanks to our panelists. You guys are all very busy professionals, and I think it speaks to our community, our board, our values, and also Glenna, to your leadership, and a huge thank to the other members of the board for allowing us to do things like this. So thanks to all of you.
Can I just say one thing, Aaron? One more thing, one little thing.
Go for it, Heather.
I got to hear Matthew Ferrara speak before. It is life-changing. Like I can't even tell you. I encourage everybody to go. I like the second you send that out, I signed up. I was so excited. So thank you for doing that and providing that for us.
A huge thank you to Steve Hammond, who serves on our board, for the idea. I know Real Estate Learning Group is one of the sponsors. We have several of our other affiliates who are stepping up to sponsor, and without all of you, it wouldn't be possible. But this is a real opportunity to professionalize our industry and defend our value proposition. So we're certainly at the local board committed to doing that, and we thank all of you for being part of it.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenna.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.